I'll leave y'all with a couple of questions to think about, to ask yourself. If you're a musician and you're working on an album, what's your big idea for the album? How do you want to break it up? Where do you want your most powerful expressions of that idea to happen? If you're working on a song, how do you want to convey your ideas across the arc of the story in the song? Do they fit into the context of an album if they're going there? If you're a content creator, do you have a clear idea of what you want to say? Do you have a clear roadmap of how you want to deliver that message? Do you have a clear story that you want to tell? If you're a mixing engineer and you're working on an album or you're working on a song, do you know when those moments of glory are happening? Do you maintain that perspective when you work? Try it. Yo, what's good? Diet Sugar here with another long form video for you today. This week, I want to talk about something that has been kind of fascinating me recently, which is different parallels that start to show up across art forms. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about content creation, because this is a series about content, songwriting, mixing, because that's something that I'm constantly trying to improve. That's a deliberate practice of mine. And tangentially, music production, because a lot of the lessons still apply. So before we get any further, I do want to encourage you to check out the written version of this, and the content actually drops earlier than the videos because, well, I have to write and record the videos. But if you're into reading, you should check out the newsletter. If you're more into short form content, you just want a little nugget of something or just a snippet, check out my Instagram, check out my Twitter. I piece this content up into more manageable bite-sized chunks so that it's easier to digest it, whatever. In today's video, I wanted to talk about this concept of thought leadership. This is how I think about thought leadership. Thought leadership is all about your perspective. That's really what it is. You're sharing your perspective on something, usually an overlap of many things. This video is an example of what I mean by that, in the sense that I've looked at multiple different subjects and I've found a commonality on top of them. And I want to share that because I think it's interesting. I think it's a unique perspective that is valuable to anyone working in songwriting, content creation, music production, or mixing. The parallels that I've found are also about perspective. And that's why I love the top-down approach. Before we get any further, let's talk about last week and connect last week to this week. Last week, we talked about the importance of being a thought leader for your own brand. And that's why I wanted to make this video next, so that you have an opportunity to, learn about what I mean when I say that. I want to also talk about productivity this week, because one of the other things that I talked about last week was scaling. You really need to try to scale your social media. And as a creative in a single person business model, that's your engagement arm at the top of your customer funnel. That's the first point where you interact with another potential fan, customer, client, your mama, your grandmama. They better be liking y'all's posts. To be able to do that, you need to be able to do it sustainably, which means you need to have good habits for productivity. One of the habits that I have, one of the things that I've tried to introduce into my process is a top-down approach. If you think about it from the top, from the big picture, you have a bit of a roadmap that you need to then break up. And being able to do that and do it efficiently and do it consistently, that keeps you focused, that keeps you moving forward on your goals. Plus, starting with the big picture allows you to maintain perspective, which is so important because it's really easy to get lost in the weeds or spend 12 hours tweaking a snare or a hi-hat. And by maintaining that perspective, you're able to convey a stronger message across your content because you can interrelate it. So before we dive into the parallels, I want to dive into a little bit of the top-down decomposition process, because that to me is really useful knowledge and I want to share that. So let's talk about taking a big idea and breaking it down. Let's say I'm starting a new series of content. So the first thing I do is I think about that as a whole thing. And so what I do is I follow a pretty simple 4-step process. I take that idea and I turn it into a series of headlines. These are the titles for the YouTube videos. Then I turn those headlines into an outline. That gives me a structure to follow. And then once I have an outline, I'll turn it into a script, a draft, a blog post, a newsletter, whatever. I'll turn it into a really long piece of content. So now I need to chunk it up. So I start piece by piece, the same way that I did with that big idea, and I chunk it up. into bite-sized, digestible pieces. I take those and I put them in different parts of the content ecosystem. We talked about that in the very first episode of this series, using the content ecosystem, spreading your ideas out. Because if you can write that really long piece of content and you can have that really long piece of content fit into an even longer series of content, and you can chunk all of those pieces out, that's a lot of content for you. So let's break down those 4 steps a little further. Let's talk about headline writing first. I consider this to be the essence of the big idea, one chunk of the big idea. And I try to focus on the story that I'm telling. So I'll take the big idea and I'll come up with a narrative across that big idea. Those are the headlines. Now I've created a storyline for the big idea. It's a pretty straightforward process, but the key takeaway is don't go too deep at this point. Don't do it. Stay in the creative space. Stay in the storytelling space. Don't worry about perfection yet. In general, don't worry about perfection at all. That's an enemy of creativity. After that, I'll take each of those headlines and I'll start writing an outline for them. This gives me a structure to follow within the smaller part of the big idea. This allows me to view the headline as a story in itself. And so again, focus on the storytelling within the story. Break the bigger story up into a smaller story and start drafting what you want that arc to be. Focus on the structure, focus on the flow. And a gem that I'll share with you is try to work quickly at this point. Don't spend too much time on the outline, because remember, it's just an outline. It's like that episode in The Office where Jim is asked to give a rundown. That's literally just an outline. Just show me a list. Show me a quick structure. So don't spend too much time on it. Don't be Jim. Don't spend a whole day on this. And in fact, I would suggest time boxing it. Put a time box around what you're working on. Spend 30 minutes and no more, and force yourself to finish it in 30 minutes, and as far as you get is as far as you get. I like to consider the outline phase as a bit of a rapid research phase. So this is where I'll do things like curate references, do a quick search on Google for keywords, and just see what shows up. Once you have those things, it's a lot easier to go into the writing session, which is next, which is the long form writing session. So at this point, now I need to take that outline and I need to build the meat of the story. I need to go in and add all of the detail. I need to connect the references to the different points of the outline. I need to turn it into content, basically, is what I need to do. Here's the thing, don't work on that on the exact same day that you wrote the outline. Allow your brain some time to just mesh with the ideas that are flowing. It's like when you're working on a mix and you've been working on it for, 4 hours, you lose context. You need a break to come back with the perspective that you need to do good work. One of the things that I try to do is I try to start my week with the outline phase, and I try to end my week with the long form phase, so that I have an entire week, one, to do other work that I need to do, because I still need to run everything. I still need to make the instrumentals. I still need to send loops to people. I still need to send emails to my email list, all of that stuff. I still need to be overwhelmed. I still need to be stressed, all that, shit that comes along with doing this. But at the end of the week, I set myself another time box and I write for a solid 3 hours on the subject. I research, I write, I connect dots. I allow myself to create for 3 full hours. It can be longer, but the point is, give yourself the time to do the detail work. Always take the time to do the detail work. Your work will be better if you do that. And don't forget, people value their time. So that long, giant piece of content that you just created is way too fucking long for so many people. So now, after you've done that, take that big, I want to make a dirty joke so bad. Take that giant piece of content and give it the biggest D for decomposition. You need to turn that long form, whatever it is, into snippets, into chunks. If you just created a song, that song could be the long form piece. The album could be the long form piece. You can reuse this process. You're reusing your ideas, you're reusing your content, but you're doing it in a way that makes it more digestible to a broader audience. Not everyone wants to spend 30 minutes watching a video. Not everyone wants to spend 4 minutes watching a song. Some people just want to hear 15-second snippets while I'm browsing through TikTok. When you're making content and it's digital content, you have to be aware that the attention spans of people on the internet are short. They're very small. Even in your long form content, you need to use things to keep people engaged, which is why storytelling is so important. But in the short form piece of content, you can focus on just a quick snippet of an idea, and it's going to be accessible to people. The true productivity hack, though, that comes from all of this entire process, is not only that you can work with focus, but that you can end up with a lot more content at the end of a week than you would expect. And you can spread that content out throughout the content ecosystem. You don't have to spend all of your time trying to create stuff to be consumed. You can spend more time with your ideas. You can spend more time with your experiments. You can spend more time on your business. You can spend more time with your family. You can spend more time with your friends. You can spend more time with your drugs, whatever it is. The gem that I'll leave you with this strategy is to reuse your ideas, reuse your content, but in different formats and in different mediums across the different parts of the content ecosystem, connecting it all the way back to that first video. That's enough about that process. That's enough about that strategy. I'm happy to dive deep into an example or a tutorial where I do this with a subject, where I do this with an idea. If y'all are interested in that, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to put a video up. So next, let's talk about the meat of this episode, which is parallels. Parallels specifically across content creation, songwriting, mixing, music production. Specifically when you approach those creative tasks with a top-down approach. And there's a few things that I'll say just to start this off. It's all art at the end of the day. Don't forget that. The top-down strategy helps you maintain a perspective. That applies to all of these. Let's talk about mixing first. So, because this is a series about content, what parallels have I found between mixing and content creation? Again, it's all art at the end of the day. It's all subjective. These are just my thoughts. When you're working on a mix, your primary goal is to move the audience that's consuming that piece of art emotionally. When you think about content, that's what makes good content, is that it moves someone emotionally. And it's not just about the technicalities of what you're working on, it's about the feelings that you can convey. It's about the story that you can tell. And it's really easy to get bogged down into the details of those technicalities with mixing, especially. It's really easy to spend way too much time trying to get your EQs perfect, trying to get your compressor settings perfect, but you lose perspective when you do that. So when you approach from the top down, and in this case, I'm talking about, if you're mixing an album, think about the feelings you want to convey across that entire album. If you're mixing a song, think about the same thing. There's this concept of moments of glory in a song. What are those? Those are the moments when something special happens, and there's not many of them, 2 or 3, across an entire song. There's maybe 2 or 3 moments of glory across an entire album in the perspective of song. And when you approach from the big picture, which is the top down, you pick up on those, and it changes your decision making. Content is the exact same. When you approach a series of content from the top down, from the idea space, identify the moments of glory, make those stand out, present those ideas in a way that makes them powerful. And it helps you to maintain perspective when you're creating a piece of content on where it fits in that story, where it fits in the arc of feelings that you want to convey. It's really important to remember the big picture with mixing specifically. You need to remember, why are you doing this? You're doing this to move someone emotionally. The way that you present ideas in a mix matters. Think about when you have a vocal come in. That needs to be the main idea. That needs to be the focus. If it's not, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right for some reason. Content is the exact same way. The way that you present the idea matters. Sometimes you need space around a piece of content. Sometimes you need context around a piece of content for it to make sense. Sometimes your content can be quiet. Sometimes it needs to be really fucking loud. A vocalist approaches the way that they sing, and we're getting a little ahead, and I'll dig into this in a minute, in the exact same way. And one thing that's similar across the two is that the way that the ideas are presented, they have a huge impact if they're done well, or they fall flat if they're not. So if you're ever working on a mix and you get to that final chorus, that final hook, and it just doesn't feel big enough, it's because the context around it is taking up too much space. There's nowhere for you to push it further. That's the exact same concept that applies with content. If all of your content is the same, if it's all monotone, nothing stands out. And you have to give certain ideas room to breathe and room to be fully explored. Like, think about a build-up in EDM music. There's a reason why the lead sounds come in slowly and get you super hyped with the build, with the drop that's about to come in. Because you need to give that idea space before it can really make the impact that it has. Sometimes you don't need that. Content is the exact same way. If you need tension, you can create tension. If you need to hype up an idea, you can hype up an idea, but it matters that you know when to make that decision. And the way that you can do that is by approaching what you're making from the idea space, identifying the powerful moments, and then giving them context or giving them space, making them loud, making them quiet. There's a gem that you can apply to both, really to everything that I'm talking about today. Don't give the audience all of your ideas at once, ever. Because if you do that, you have nowhere to go as a creative. You don't. And remember, everyone loves tension. Everyone loves hype. There's a reason why movie theaters are full of people that scream during a horror movie, because it's tense as fuck and then something crazy happens. So keep your audience guessing. Don't give them everything at once. Build a little hype, add a little tension, fake them out every now and then, just to let them know that you can do it as a creator, to let them know that you have that power. If you take the time to build things up, when you finally reveal that big idea, it's powerful. It's fucking delicious as an audience member when that happens. And if you do that, your work stands out. People remember the emotions that they felt. They remember the feeling. And we'll dig into why that is so important next week. Let's talk about songwriting and content creation. Again, it's still art. That still applies. Pretty much everything that I've already said about mixing, you can apply those same parallels. The way that you present your ideas matter. How loud you make them matter. The language that you use during those moments of glory, that matters. There are specific parts in a song, like the first 4 bars of a hook. What you choose to say is so important as a songwriter. The melody that you choose to use, the way that you tell the story across the verse, the contrast that it needs to have against a hook. That's important. Here's a direct example. If you approach the hook of a song as a very big picture of the story that you're going to tell, where it's kind of vague, kind of broad, kind of general, it's going to resonate with more people, which is great for the hook. That gives you space then in the verse to dive into the details of what you're trying to say, to really tell the story, to really talk about it. And you can even flip the context of what you're talking about, the perspective that you're talking from between the first verse and the second verse, to create an even more compelling story. And then guess what? The hook, in its broad sense, can have 2 separate meanings across your song, can have 3 or 4. You can get away with doing so much with so little if you understand the art of storytelling. And we'll talk about the art of storytelling in a later episode. The gem that I'll give is that storytelling is your most powerful skill as a creator. It's the most important thing that you should work on, because at the end of the day, storytelling is what conveys that emotion. As a songwriter, the better that you get at it, the better that you get at not giving everything away, hiding certain details in the first verse so that when they come out in the second verse, it makes the audience go, damn. I mean, think about it. Your favorite artists, the people that told that story, they are a master at storytelling. That's the reason why you resonate so much with what they've created. And here's a fun parallel that just starts to pop out. If you think about approaching content and songwriting in a similar way across the arc of your story or across the arc of your idea. Some people are amazing at freestyle. It's a skill to be able to just create something on the spot with your mind and your voice. If you do the exact same thing with content, if you create something on the spot and make sure that it fits into that larger part of your story, delicious. Chef's kiss. And something that exists in songwriting that's very powerful is the risks that people take with emotion, the vulnerability that they show. Do the same in content. Apply that same concept to content for yourself, for your brand, and look at it from the top down. Where are those most powerful moments across the arc of a story to be vulnerable? The Weeknd is a master at this. Go listen to any of his songs. There's vulnerability and key points on purpose because it hits way harder in that moment. Sometimes a singer And Billie Eilish is a great example of this. They can get away with a whisper. Other times, there's a need to increase your voice to convey the right emotion. Approach your content creation as the exact same. Sometimes your content doesn't need to be loud. This is the same parallel that I talked about with the vocals needing to stand out. Sometimes it does. The point that I'll make though is when you approach it from the top down, you know when to make the content loud. You know when it needs to hit the hardest because you can see the story play out before you flesh out the details of it. You don't have to try to cobble it together. You're thinking ahead is really what you're doing. And that's why it's so powerful. So let's connect the three and then talk about music production. At the end of the day, because it's all storytelling and it's all art and it's all emotion based, that means it's important to be authentic because you can tell when it's not authentic and it doesn't resonate as strongly. One thing that I have learned over the past few years of learning to produce and following music production as a passion and then turning it into a career is that templates are your friend. You can work a lot faster if you use a template. That's really important because again, productivity. You can apply a template to anything though. You can apply a template to your content. You probably already do that one. That one's easy. You know, if you have the same kind of format for your Instagram posts, whatever, that's a template. You don't fight that with content. Why do you fight it with music production, right? Think about that question. Why would you fight it with songwriting? Just because you have a template, and guess what? A template for songwriting is popular song structures. That's a template. A, B, C, A, B, A, B, you know, whatever. Mixers use a template. It gives you a starting point. It lets you work faster. You don't have to use every part of the template to use a template. You don't have to have the exact same outcome every time you use a template for the template to be valuable to you. I mean, they're a great way to streamline your work, save you time, and you should value that. You should value your time more than you value your fucking ego because you can delegate work to a template. Always need to low cut your synths? Fucking put that in your template. Always want to say fuck in the most powerful moment of your song? Put that into your template. There's this really cool book that I read called The Addiction Formula, a holistic approach to writing memorable songs, something like that. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's incredibly interesting. The person that wrote this has just so much of an interesting perspective to how they approach songwriting, to how they think about songwriting. If you're interested in songwriting, check it out. You'll probably find it incredibly interesting. And the link is not an affiliate link or anything like that. I just think it's incredibly valuable. And to kind of summarize and to connect music production back to that, all of those things may seem separate, you know, in some sense, but at their core, they're all about telling a story that's memorable. They're all about connecting with the audience, whether that's a viewer, a reader, a listener, whatever, but connecting on an emotional level with the audience. So, you know, enjoy the process of being in that creative space and just fucking tell a good story. It doesn't matter how perfect your mix is. It doesn't matter how perfect your songwriting is. It doesn't matter how perfect your productions are. It doesn't matter how perfect your content is. Focus on the story. That's what really matters. Because your story is yours, no one else's. So you can't expect anyone else to share that perspective. You have to be the one to do it. That should be empowering. That should give you permission to just be your fucking self. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about leaning into you. Let's talking about leaning into who you are as a creative, as a creator. Let's talk about fucking monetizing that shit. Make money from your ideas. As a creator, that should be one of the things that you care about. It doesn't have to be the main thing that you care about, but you need to be aware that you can monetize your ideas as a creative person. Not even that, you can monetize your creativity. We'll talk more about leaning into you and who you are in the next episode. I don't want this one to get too long. But let's talk about why in the first episode I mentioned a content strategy. A content strategy helps you tell your story across different mediums and make sure that everything is connected. Do you remember that from the first episode? If you don't, check it out. I'll put a link. And your content strategy itself should be about telling that story in a way that's going to resonate at those different mediums, at those different interaction points with your fans, customers, your grandma, your mama. Think about what you want to say at each of those different interaction points. If you always want your Twitter content to be quiet, you're probably not going to need to think about too many of those moments of glory going to Twitter because it's just not going to land the way that you want it to. The point is to deliver the right message at the right place at the right time across the arc of the story so that it hits. Your story, when it hits, should feel like an 808 coming in. Big. powerful, delicious. Let's wrap things up. We talked about the parallels across songwriting, content creation, mixing, tangentially music production. We talked about how all of that is really the art of storytelling. We talked about how all of that is so deeply rooted in emotion. I'll leave y'all with a couple of questions to think about, to ask yourself. If you're a musician and you're working on an album, what's your big idea for the album? How do you want to break it up? Where do you want your most powerful expressions of that idea to happen? If you're working on a song, how do you want to convey your ideas across the arc of the story in the song? Do they fit into the context of an album if they're going there? If you're a content creator, do you have a clear idea of what you want to say? Do you have a clear roadmap of how you want to deliver that message? Do you have a clear story that you want to tell? If you're a mixing engineer and you're working on an album or you're working on a song, do you know when those moments of glory are happening? Do you maintain that perspective when you work? Try it. Lean into the intuitive side of yourself because you're a creative person. You have that naturally. If you think about the bigger picture, everything meshes together better. And here's a gem that I'll leave you with. When you're working on a big piece of something, whatever it is, a piece of, if you're a painter, whatever, the tone and the feel of what you're working on, they have to mesh with your brand. They have to mesh with your aesthetic. That's why I suggest leaning into yourself, understanding who you are, being authentic, because you already have good tastes. That's why you want to create things. So lean into those tastes. Don't try to rebel against them. We'll talk more about that later. Anyways, if you're working as a creative and you just want to work as a creative and you're struggling, send me a question, connect with me on Instagram, connect with me on Twitter. And if you're struggling with something, I'm happy to just have a conversation about it. If you're curious about something and you want me to dig into it, leave a comment. I will research stuff. And just because I like doing that, I like to learn. I like to philosophize. I don't know if that's a word, but I like to get stoned and just fucking dig into subjects. It's fun to me. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a curious person. So if you have an idea that you're curious about, hit me up about it. That's it for this week's episode. Next week, we'll talk about authenticity, why I think that is key for success as a creative, why I think you should lean into yourself. I mentioned some of these already. Why I think it makes you the most marketable version of your brand. And lastly, we'll talk about embracing your influences instead of rejecting them in the name of originality. That's it. That's pretty much what I got for y'all. Again, as a reminder, I do put this content out in the form of a newsletter. Feel free to sign up for that if you're into that kind of thing. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel. Leave me a like, hit that notification bell. Follow me on Instagram or Twitter if you want more bite-sized pieces of it. If you're just curious about listening to some of the stuff that I create, there's a link in the description for my beat store, streaming services, all that stuff. Go check me out. If you're looking for instrumentals or sample packs, definitely check out the beat store. You can download pretty much everything for free. Yeah, hope you enjoyed this. All right, catch y'all later. Bye.